All right, let's try to imagine this for a sec. You're on a cruise ship, the sun is setting, casting an orange glow across the vast, endless ocean. You get this sense of awe, of power, maybe even a touch of fear as you realize just how immense and unpredictable the sea can be. The ancient Greeks personified that as Poseidon, their god of the sea.
It's not just about calm waters and gentle waves. What's so fascinating about Poseidon is how he embodies that raw, untamed energy of nature. The Greeks saw him as the force behind earthquakes, the untamed spirit of horses, even the creator of mythical beasts.
Right. We often think of him as just the Greek Neptune. Today, we're going to go on a deep dive to uncover so much more about Poseidon. To guide us, we've got expert Dr. Seth Bendick, curator of Greek and Roman art at the Cleveland Museum of Art. He's got incredible insights into how Poseidon was worshipped, his tangled family tree, and why his legacy is so much richer than we might realize.
Think about it. For the ancient Greeks, a civilization so intertwined with the sea, Poseidon was one of the big three gods, sharing power with Zeus, the sky god, and Hades, ruler of the underworld. But what's interesting is that Poseidon's domain wasn't limited to just the ocean depths.
Exactly. Dr. Bendick actually highlighted this quote from the ancient traveler Pausanias: "All men call Poseidon, god of the sea, of earthquakes, and of horses." Horses, now that's a connection I never would have made.
It's a connection that speaks to a deeper understanding of Poseidon's power. He wasn't just about tranquil seas, he represented that raw, unpredictable energy that could both sustain and destroy. Earthquakes fit into that perfectly, and so do horses, those powerful, sometimes wild creatures.
Dr. Bendick even brought up the hippocamp. You know, that mythical creature with the head and forelegs of a horse and the tail of a fish? It's like the perfect visual representation of Poseidon's dual domains.
Absolutely. And these hippocamps weren't just mythical decorations either. They were often depicted pulling Poseidon's chariot, further solidifying that link between the sea god and the power of horses. But Poseidon's influence extended far beyond just his own attributes. His offspring play a massive role in Greek mythology, and that family tree is, well, let's just say it's as complicated as a soap opera.
Oh, tell me about it. We're not just talking about a few kids here. Poseidon fathered offspring with goddesses, nymphs, even Medusa.
And these weren't just any offspring. We're talking about major players in Greek mythology. Theseus, for example, the legendary hero of Athens, was said to be Poseidon's son.
Which adds another layer to his rivalry with Athena, right? They were constantly battling for the hearts and minds of the Athenians.
Exactly. And then there's the Cyclops Polyphemus, the one-eyed giant from Homer's Odyssey. He was also Poseidon's son, which, if you think about it, adds a whole other dimension to Odysseus' encounter with the Cyclops.
It definitely makes that blinding scene even more intense. And let's not forget Pegasus, the winged horse, another one of Poseidon's offspring, born from that ill-fated union with Medusa.
It's remarkable how Poseidon's lineage is woven through so many foundational myths. It's almost as if his power, that raw, untamed energy, was passed down to create both heroes and monsters.
Speaking of visualizing Poseidon's power, let's talk about how he was depicted in art. Starting with statues, I imagine it wasn't always easy to tell him apart from Zeus, was it?
You're absolutely right. Dr. Bendick mentioned that without specific attributes, those two could look remarkably similar. Both were often portrayed as bearded, elder figures, embodying authority and power. But there were some key giveaways.
The trident, obviously. That seems like a pretty clear sign you're dealing with the god of the sea.
Exactly. Sometimes he'd be holding it like a scepter, emphasizing his royal status. Other times he'd be wielding it as a weapon, ready to unleash the fury of the ocean.
So if the trident was missing, how could you tell it was Poseidon?
Well, that's where things get tricky. Dr. Bendick brought up a famous example, the god from the sea, a larger-than-life statue discovered in a shipwreck. It's missing its attribute, the object it would have been holding.
Oh, so it could be either Zeus or Poseidon. Talk about a cliffhanger for the ages.
It really is. Some scholars think it was a trident, making it Poseidon. Others argue for a thunderbolt, the symbol of Zeus. It just shows how closely these two were linked in the Greek imagination.
Okay, but what about pottery? Did ancient Greek vases give us a clearer picture of Poseidon?
Thankfully, yes. Dr. Bendick explained that pottery often depicted scenes from mythology, giving us more context. So if you see a bearded figure with a trident on a vase, chances are you've found Poseidon.
We're talking about those iconic black figure and red figure vases, right? The ones you see in museums.
Exactly. They're like windows into the stories the ancient Greeks told about their gods. And those stories weren't just limited to myths, they also reflected how the Greeks worshipped Poseidon.
Right, and his sanctuaries weren't just limited to the coastline either. One striking example is the temple at Sunyan, perched on a dramatic cliff overlooking the Aegean Sea. Why would they build a temple to the sea god so far inland?
Well, imagine you're a sailor approaching Athens from afar. That temple would have been like a beacon, visible from miles away.
Ah, so it was more about marking a safe passage than being right on the water. It symbolized protection for those navigating the often treacherous seas.
Precisely. But let's not forget about the festivals dedicated to Poseidon. Dr. Bendick made this fascinating comparison between ancient Greek religious festivals and modern-day sporting events. He described the Isthmian Games, held every 2 years near Corinth, as one of the majors, alongside the Olympics and the Pythian Games.
So like the Wimbledon of ancient Greece.
Exactly. These games weren't just about athletic competition, though. They were deeply intertwined with religious rituals honoring Poseidon. There were boat races, sacrifices, all sorts of ceremonies. It gives you a sense of how ingrained Poseidon was in their culture.
It wasn't just about appeasing an angry god either. It was about celebrating his power and influence. And speaking of power, we can't forget about Poseidon's role in some of the most epic battles in Greek mythology. Dr. Bendick told this fantastic story about the Gigantomachy, the war between the gods and the giants.
This is where Poseidon's brute strength really shines. Picture this. He literally picks up an island, the island of Nisyros, and hurls it at a giant.
Wow, talk about making a statement. So is
Yeah.
that where the saying "move mountains" comes from?
Maybe. It's certainly a vivid example of how the Greeks envisioned Poseidon's raw power. And for any listener planning a Greek island trip, Nisyros is definitely worth a visit. Just, maybe be mindful of any tremors you might feel.
Duly noted. But all empires, even those of the gods, eventually transform. And Poseidon's story continues as we move into Roman mythology. He becomes Neptune, right? But was it just a simple name change?
That's where things get a bit more nuanced. Dr. Bendick pointed out that Neptune, in early Roman and Etruscan belief, was primarily a first-water god. He didn't have those strong associations with earthquakes and horses that we see with Poseidon.
So there were some key differences.
Definitely. And it probably reflects the different relationship the Romans had with the sea compared to the Greeks.
That makes sense. But did Neptune hold the same level of importance in Roman culture as Poseidon did in Greek culture?
That's debatable. He was still a significant deity, appearing in art, receiving dedications, and even being linked to Roman emperors.
Wait, emperors linked to a god. Tell me more.
Well, imagine a Roman general winning a major naval victory. He might be depicted on coins as Neptune or using symbols associated with the sea god.
Ah, so it was a way of associating themselves with divine power and authority.
Exactly. It's a fascinating glimpse into how the Romans adapted and incorporated deities into their own cultural and political landscape.
It really highlights how these gods could evolve and take on new meanings as cultures shifted and changed over time.
It's like a game of mythological telephone. The story gets passed down, but it changes a bit with each retelling.
That's a great analogy. It reminds us that even though we often talk about Greek mythology as this fixed set of stories, it was actually incredibly dynamic and fluid.
Exactly. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, it suggests that Poseidon's legacy is so much more than just being the Greek Neptune. He's this powerful, enduring archetype that has resonated across cultures and throughout history.
I'm starting to see why you say he's your favorite Greek god.
Well, he's definitely got charisma, but it's more than that. It's the way he embodies this primal elemental force that humans have always wrestled with. The sea, earthquakes, horses, they all represent this untamed energy that can be both beautiful and terrifying.
It's like that feeling you get standing on a stormy coastline. You're in awe of the power of nature, but there's also a sense of vulnerability.
Exactly. And the ancient Greeks personified that feeling as Poseidon. He wasn't just a god to be worshipped, he was a force to be reckoned with.
And that force, that legacy, continues to ripple through art and literature even today.
Absolutely. Think about all the ways we still use Poseidon's image in stories. From brands and logos to movies and TV shows, he's still a powerful symbol.
It's amazing how these ancient myths continue to capture our imaginations.
It speaks to their enduring power. They tap into something fundamental about the human experience, our relationship with nature, our fascination with power, our desire to understand the forces that shape our lives.
It's making me want to go back and reread the Odyssey.
You should. And pay close attention to Poseidon's role in the story. It's more complex than you might remember.
Okay, so we've covered Poseidon's origins, his connection to horses, his rather extensive family tree, and how he was depicted in art. We've even touched on his Roman counterpart, Neptune. But we haven't talked much about how he was actually worshipped.
You're right, and that's a crucial part of understanding Poseidon's significance. We've already mentioned the Isthmian Games, but there were all sorts of rituals and practices associated with his worship.
Like what?
Well, sacrifices were common. Animals, especially bulls, were often offered to Poseidon to appease him or to seek his favor.
That makes sense. He was a powerful god, and I imagine the ancient Greeks wanted to stay on his good side.
Especially those who relied on the sea for their livelihood, fishermen, sailors, merchants, they all had a vested interest in keeping Poseidon happy.
So were there any specific offerings or rituals associated with those professions?
There are records of fishermen offering a portion of their catch to Poseidon, or pouring libations of wine into the sea as an offering.
It's like they were acknowledging his dominion over the waters and asking for his continued blessing.
Exactly. And there are even some stories of sailors throwing horses into the sea as a sacrifice to Poseidon before embarking on a long journey.
Whoa, horses. That seems a bit extreme.
It does seem strange to us, but remember, horses were deeply symbolic in ancient Greece. They represented power, strength, and even the untamed forces of nature. So offering a horse to Poseidon might have been seen as the ultimate act of appeasement.
It definitely gives you a sense of how seriously they took their relationship with the gods.
Absolutely. And it wasn't just about fear or appeasement. There was also a deep reverence for Poseidon's power and the role he played in their lives.
So it was a complex relationship full of both respect and a healthy dose of fear.
Exactly. And that complexity is reflected in the myths and stories they told about him. He wasn't always a benevolent figure. He could be vengeful, wrathful, and even destructive.
We've already talked about his role in Odysseus's troubles, and then there's the whole earthquake thing. It's not hard to imagine why the ancient Greeks would have been a bit wary of him.
But that's part of what makes him such a fascinating figure. He embodies the duality of nature, its capacity for both creation and destruction.
He's a reminder that the natural world isn't always predictable or controllable. It's a force to be respected, not just exploited.
And that's a lesson that's perhaps even more relevant today than it was in ancient Greece.
Especially with climate change and the increasing frequency of natural disasters.
We're constantly being reminded of the power of nature and our own vulnerability in the face of it.
So Poseidon's legacy isn't just about ancient myths and rituals. It's about our ongoing relationship with the natural world and the forces that shape our lives.
Exactly. And that's why I think he continues to fascinate us. He represents something primal and enduring about the human experience.
It's making me wonder how the ancient Greeks would view our current relationship with the environment.
That's a great question. I imagine they would have some strong opinions on the matter.
Maybe that's a topic for another deep dive.
I'm in. But for now, let's bring it back to Poseidon. We've talked a lot about his power, his myths, his worship. But there's another aspect of his story that I find particularly intriguing. His rivalry with Athena.
Oh yeah, that was a big one. They were constantly battling for supremacy, weren't they?
It wasn't just about ego, though. Their rivalry reflects a deeper tension between two different ways of life.
How so?
Well, Athena represented wisdom, strategy, and the arts of civilization. She was the patron goddess of Athens, a city known for its intellectual and cultural achievements.
Right, and Poseidon represented the raw power of nature. He was the god of the sea, earthquakes, and horses, all forces that could be both beneficial and destructive.
Exactly. So their rivalry represents this ongoing tension between human ingenuity and the untamed forces of the natural world.
It's like a microcosm of humanity's struggle to control and coexist with nature.
Precisely. And it's a struggle that's played out throughout history, from ancient Greece to the present day.
So how did their rivalry manifest itself in Greek mythology?
Well, the most famous example is their contest for the patronage of Athens. Each god offered a gift to the city, and the Athenians had to choose which gift was more valuable.
I remember learning about this in school. Athena gave the olive tree, right?
Yes, it was a symbol of peace, prosperity, and sustenance, a practical and valuable gift for a burgeoning city.
And what did Poseidon offer?
He struck the ground with his trident and created a saltwater spring, A dramatic display of power, but not exactly practical for a city that needed fresh water.
No wonder Athena won.
It's a classic example of brains over brawn, but it also highlights the different values represented by each god. Athena's gift was about nurturing and sustaining life, while Poseidon's was about raw power and dominance.
It's interesting to think about how those values play out in the broader context of Greek mythology.
It's almost as if their rivalry is a metaphor for the challenges and choices faced by the ancient Greeks.
On the one hand, they were trying to build a civilization, create order out of chaos.
And on the other hand, they were constantly confronted with the unpredictable forces of nature.
It's a reminder that even in a world of gods and monsters, the human experience is full of complexities and contradictions.
And that's part of what makes these myths so enduring. They resonate with our own struggles and aspirations.
Speaking of resonating, it's striking how often Poseidon's story intersects with other major figures in Greek mythology. We've already mentioned Odysseus and Theseus, but he pops up in stories about Heracles, Perseus, even Jason and the Argonauts.
It's almost as if he's this ubiquitous presence lurking in the background of so many key myths.
Yeah, he's like the ultimate wild card. You never know when he's going to show up or what side he's going to be on.
He's definitely not a god to be trifled with, and his influence extends far beyond just his own stories. His offspring, his rivals, his interventions, they all help to shape the course of Greek mythology.
It's like he's this invisible hand guiding events from behind the scenes, which, considering his domain is earthquakes, is kind of fitting.
Right. It's no wonder he was both revered and feared, and that duality is what makes him so fascinating. He embodies that unpredictable power of nature, something we still grapple with today, especially with climate change and the increasing frequency of natural disasters.
It's like his legacy isn't just about ancient myths, but about our ongoing relationship with the world around us. So, as we wrap up our deep dive into Poseidon, what's the one key takeaway you want to leave us with?
I think it's this. Poseidon wasn't just a one-dimensional god of the sea. He was a complex figure embodying both the life-giving and destructive forces of nature. He was a king, a warrior, a father, a rival, and a force to be reckoned with. His legacy is woven into the fabric of Greek mythology, and his influence continues to ripple through art and culture even today.
It's like he's this mirror reflecting back our own hopes and fears, our aspirations and anxieties.
And maybe by understanding him better, we can understand ourselves a bit better, too.
So you're saying this deep dive wasn't just about Poseidon, it was about us.
Exactly. It's about exploring those timeless themes of humanity's relationship with nature, our fascination with power, and our desire to understand the forces that shape our lives. And, who knows, maybe along the way, we've even uncovered some hidden depths within ourselves.
I love that. So for those of you listening who want to continue exploring, I encourage you to seek out images of Poseidon in museums or online. Notice his attributes, the stories depicted, and consider what they reveal about the beliefs and values of the ancient Greeks. But also, think about what they reveal about ourselves, what resonates with you, what challenges your assumptions, what makes you want to learn more.
Happy exploring. And remember, sometimes the most fascinating discoveries are the ones we make within ourselves.
Until next time, keep diving deep.